Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Queue. In this video, I'm looking at the Tier 10 American heavy fighter, the Lockheed XF-90. Hello there, and here on the tarmac outside my hangar is the Lockheed XF-90, a plane developed in response to a request from the United States Air Force for a long-range penetration fighter and bomber escort. Lockheed were awarded the contract for two prototypes built during 1948. Various difficulties meant that test flights did not take place until June 1949, when it was discovered that the engines were severely underpowered, and this led to the cancellation of the project. This aircraft never saw operational service. Aesthetically, I think it's one of the most beautiful aircraft in the game, and it was an object of desire for me when I first started playing. I was severely disappointed because I found that I couldn't play this plane well. We'll discuss some of the reasons why later in the video. The World of Warplanes team have stripped the aircraft of its wingtip fuel tanks and made it a heavy fighter with six 20mm cannons as armament, and this makes it a formidable opponent, and we'll discuss what you can do with the aircraft again later in the video. So with that, let's go and have a look at the numbers. Here is a spreadsheet showing all three of the Tier 10 heavies. If you don't know how this works, there's a link to a video in the description below that will explain it to you. I will point out that in all cases the configuration of the aircraft is stock. Where available, the ordnance is mounted, no equipment is being used, the pilot is in the barracks, and the modules are all the top ones. Before we look at the numbers in detail, here are some key points. This is the fastest Tier 10 heavy. However, it's also the least manoeuvrable Tier 10 heavy. It has the best climb rate by some distance, but also the lowest DPS on its weaponry. Let's get into the detail, and if we look at the guns, immediately we can see the confirmation that the cumulative DPS is worst in class. 1080, the rating is 62, and you can see the ME-262 and the Gloucester Javelin have considerably higher ratings. But there is good news coming. The rate of fire is 600 for the 20mm. This is a lot faster than the 30mm on both the Gloucester Javelin and the ME-262, and because of the short range of the 30mm on the ME-262, that rate of fire is actually quite tricky to handle. The range is much better on the XF-90. It's the same or even better than that for the Gloucester Javelin at 2,690 feet. Auto aim angle, the man you can be off target by, and the game corrects your aim for you so that you still hit the target. It might seem a little bit miserly at 2.5 degrees. You've probably heard me say that 2.5 degrees is actually below average. However, when you compare it to the other two heavies, considering they've got bigger guns, their auto aim angle is actually even tighter at 2.2. So in that context, 2.5 degrees is pretty good. But the really good news here is the dispersion angle. That's the amount the bullets spread out as they leave the muzzle of the gun, and 0.4 is an excellent figure for these cannons, and it compares very well to the 0.6 for the Gloucester Javelin and the ME-262's 30mm cannons. Overheat time is not so good though, only 4 seconds. Whilst that's the same as the ME-262, it's considerably inferior to the Gloucester Javelin, and it means that you really need to be on target with your guns, otherwise you're going to be wasting some valuable burst damage. However, what helps you here is an excellent shell velocity of 1897 feet. This means that you don't need to give much lead, and most of you will find these guns very easy to use. I say most of you because I'm actually an exception. I find these guns incredibly tricky. I find the 20mm on, for instance, this plane, on the Cutlass and the Pirate, all very difficult because I will look for the sparkles on the aircraft I'm shooting at and not listen for the sound of the bullets hitting that aircraft. You must do the latter because there seems to be a mismatch between the sparkles and the sounds for these guns, and I can never overcome that. Most people I've spoken to don't seem to have a problem. I'm sure you won't either. And these guns will chainsaw through small, low hit point targets like light fighters very easily indeed. It's not quite true of things like bombers, and of course that's significant on the EU server. There's a pair of handy bombs on the aircraft, two 500-pounders, very useful for finishing off sectors, particularly if, for instance, you've been over a mining plant, shot down a couple of enemy bombers and you need to take out a couple of targets. These will do the job. Survivability is not great. At 18, it's as fragile as the ME-262, which is a little bit of a surprise because the ME-262 looks like a fairly chunky aircraft. In fact, there's at least one multi-role at Tier 10 which has higher hit points. than this aircraft, and that's bad news if you are in the position of having to chase bombers. Now, my recommendation to you would be don't chase bombers, but on the EU server, if you get into bomber spammed games, you can barely avoid doing that, so you need to take countermeasures. On the NA server, not so bad. You've probably got the time to manoeuvre into position to take the bomber up from above or below and from the front. On the EU server, that's far trickier if you've got lots of bombers to contend with. However, flat out, I would suggest that the Gloucester Javelin, with its high survivability figure, is the best bomber killer at tier 10 amongst the heavies. Airspeed, it's best in class, highest cruise speed by some fair distance, highest boost maximum speed, but this time you can see that the Gloucester Javelin is actually very close to it. The boost duration is 25 seconds and the Gloucester Javelin has 40. So if it's basically a Gloucester Javelin chasing you, and even if you start with full boost, if it's got full boost, it will overhaul you. And you can't dive away from it. 745 miles an hour in maximum dive speed for all three of these heavies. However, there is something you can do, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Maneuverability, worst in class. Considerably worst in class, and you probably wouldn't build this in order to try and outturn any of the other heavies. However, you might consider putting some maneuverability on your build in order to give you more time turning with a target that you're shooting at, and perhaps make the difference between failing to kill it and destroying it. Controllability, let's just look at that figure very quickly. It's as good as the ME-262, it's slightly better than the Gloucester Javelin. For what it's worth, this aircraft will respond to an instruction to change direction just a little bit quicker than the Gloucester Javelin, and more or less at the same speed as the ME-262. But given that it's not very manoeuvrable, that's a fairly moot point. The range in which your aircraft characteristics don't degrade is 229 miles an hour, between 414 and 643 miles an hour. But again, as the least manoeuvrable aircraft, this is probably not going to be that important to you either. One thing's for sure, with a stall speed of 186 miles an hour, you are not going to be using the technique of slamming on your brakes in order to make an aircraft fly past you. Altitude performance, first blush, it looks like it's very good news. Green across the board. 96, the rating, it's above that for the ME-262 and the Gloucester Javelin, but if you look more closely you can see that the maximum optimum altitude and the maximum ceiling here are exactly the same as the Gloucester Javelin. However, where you do score is having a considerably higher climb rate than either of the other two heavies, and this provides an escape route. If you're at speed and you go up, in theory you're going to be able to distance yourself from the other two heavies much more quickly than if you go in level flight or in a dive. As far as acceleration is concerned, we don't know anything about drag in the game, of course. I presume it's there, but we don't have any figures for it. But if the thrust to weight ratio is anything to go by, this aircraft will accelerate significantly quicker than the ME-262 and at least as well as the Gloucester Javelin. Now, as there are only 3 aircraft in this comparison, there's not much point in looking at the worst in class figures, because even if you've got a best in class figure, that will be the 3rd worst in class down here. So for what it's worth, I have actually done the comparison, but I don't think we'll spend any time talking about that. So let's go and look and see how I've set the aircraft up. Here we are back with the XF-90. My aircraft is specialised, which means I have all of the equipment and consumable slots available. When you first get this aircraft, you will find the following. You have 5 equipment slots, but 2 of them are locked. 1 on the airframe and 1 out of 2 on the engine. You have a slot that's available on the cockpit, 1 on the engine and 1 for the forward-firing weapon. On the consumables, you have 1 slot locked out of 5, and again it's on the airframe. The other slots on the cockpit, 2 on the engine, and 1 on the forward-firing weapons. Having put the aircraft into specialist configuration, let's see what I've done with it, and I think there are some surprises coming up for some of you. In the cockpit slot, we have not a gun sight, but cockpit armour. I'll explain why in a moment. Let's go through the other choices very quickly. G-suit. I suspect that some of you might be tempted by the G-suit because of this increased manoeuvrability. Might give you a little bit more time on target. I don't think you're going to be using it for dogfighting capabilities, but my feeling is that this is a choice for an experienced flyer of this plane. So for most of you coming to it afresh, this is probably not the piece of equipment I would recommend. There is a fairly strong argument for using the navigational radio equipment. This reduces the range at which your aircraft can be detected, and perhaps being a little bit stealthy will stand some of you in good stead. You might be able to sneak up on those bombers and get to shoot them before they start shooting you, for instance. I haven't tried that, but it's worth considering. But again, I think this is for an experienced player. The obvious choice that I haven't gone for is the gun sight. I'll explain why in a moment. There is no reason not to mount a gun sight, and if I were playing on the NA server, I would mount a gun sight and improve the accuracy. The dispersion angle is already very good, as I've mentioned before, but we might be able to do something about the auto-aim angle as well, and thus make these weapons even more usable. And just to emphasise the point, on the NA server, that's definitely the piece of equipment I would mount. So why have I gone for cockpit armour here? Well, quite simply, it's because of bomber spam games on the EU server. If you have a lot of bombers in the game, which you frequently do on the EU server, then the preferred tactic of attacking from below or above and from in front, and then turning away to try and stay in front of the bomber, you haven't got time. You are going to be forced, if you want to try and win the game that is, to attack bombers from behind. And cockpit armour is one of the things that I use to stop my pilot being injured, because once your pilot is injured, you can't do damage to the bomber, and then usually, especially with the fragility of this aircraft, it can pick you off at ease with what is probably a potent rear gun. So that's the first choice that may be a little bit of a surprise. The next one I don't think is as much of a surprise. It's polished skin, and in fact in this case I had a piece of experimental equipment lying around and I've mounted it on the aircraft. Whilst the aircraft is fragile, I don't think there's much mileage in either mounting the reinforced skin or the reinforced airframe, so I don't recommend that. However, there is an argument for mounting a lightweight wing frame. You can do quite a lot with the manoeuvrability of this aircraft, and I suspect, again, an experienced player might be tempted to go for that and try and prey on aircraft such as the Me-262 and the Gloucester Javelin, which haven't been built for manoeuvrability, and catch them out with what will be a surprisingly agile XF-90. So do bear that in mind. But if you're looking for speed, I would recommend the polished skin would probably be your first choice, bearing in mind you can't mount it on the stock aircraft, of course. The next choice, high-speed gas turbine to try and make the aircraft as fast as possible at high speeds. I'm not a great fan of uprated engines, and as we know, the cruise speed on this aircraft is already high. Some may prefer to make it even higher. It's up to you. Bear in mind that your fire risk will come down to something like 40 instead of 60, getting towards the territory where you might want to consider using a fire extinguisher or at least one of the two pilot skills, fire resistance or firefighting. Of course, you have got a consumable which you could choose, which combats the effect of fire as well, so that's a third possible choice if you go for an uprated engine. But in my case, I've gone for the high-speed gas turbine to improve the speed of the aircraft under boost. Now here we go with the lightweight power unit, and given that broadly you can see I'm heading for a speed build here, why haven't I put on that uprated engine? Well, it comes back to what I said earlier in the video. I have a little bit of trouble with the guns on this aircraft and the others that mount similar 20mm cannons, so I've opted to put on the lightweight power unit to give me a little bit more time, a little bit more agility, and that will allow me to keep the guns on a target just a little bit longer. And it works for me, is the short answer. That's all I can say. So we have the lightweight power unit here. And then I've gone for improving the range of the guns, so long gun barrels. This will get the range up to around about 3,000 feet. And again, this is the principle of I want to start shooting the aircraft as early as possible so that I can, if I am off target, correct with the maximum amount of time available. And believe you me, the amount of time you've got to correct your aim is pretty short if you're flying fast in this plane. So there's a build which is perhaps a little bit surprising to some of you. I will show you the effects of this build in the post-build effects. I will also show you two other full builds, the conventional high-speed build with a gun sight. Actually, it won't be with a gun sight, it will still be with a cockpit armour, but then a third build I will show you will be a manoeuvrability build, and that will be using a gun sight. And I'll do a little bit more as well. You'll see when you get to that section. Coming to the consumables, I've mounted a fairly standard set of consumables here. The first aid dressing package, although it's fairly rare that my pilot gets injured, although I haven't got the battle tested skill here, so still worth having. Extra manoeuvrability if I'm fighting another XF-90, but beware, if it's been built for manoeuvrability, you're going to struggle, but that's the theory there. Nobody will be surprised by the fact I'm using engine cooling to get an extra 10 seconds of boost on top of whatever you've already got, provided you've got at least 1 second of boost available, and then an engine restart here. Those of you who are interested in speed will consider the improved mixture control, or if you're prepared to mount gold consumables, the anti-oxidizing additive. If we just look at the pneumatic control assist, if you put the exhaust bleed inverting system on, you can reduce the chance of fire by 20%, and if you've mounted an uprating engine, you might consider this instead of the pneumatic control assist. Of course, you could go for the fire extinguisher. Don't think anybody's going to be mounting sparkles, but you might. You might be of the mind to humorously amuse people who are watching you. Finally, the universal ammunition, which should be chosen over and above standard ammunition all the time. Again, if you're prepared to use gold, you probably already know all about these, and I'm not going to spend time going through them. So now we need to turn our attention to pilot skills. Just before we talk about pilot skills, however, there's one final point I should make. I didn't really explain why the engine restart bottle is mounted here. Well, it's obvious. It's for restarting the engine. However, it is true that the XF-90's engines are particularly fragile and very likely to get knocked out. So much so that some of you might want to take measures against that, and then your choice here in one of the engine slots is engine armor protection. That will reduce the number of times the engine is knocked out, and you may feel more comfortable with that. However, for me, this has such a serious effect on the plane's main selling point, its speed, that it's something I'm loath to do. But bear it in mind. And now I think we're ready to talk pilot skills. I've opened the pilot dialog box, and although 5 skills, as you can see here, may not seem a lot, that is 12 skill points, so this is a highly trained pilot. And what you see are the core skills that I would select for any build that I put on the XF-90. Stepping through them quickly, we have Aerodynamics Expert to improve the effect of my equipment on speed particularly, but also manoeuvrability. Engine Guru 1, which improves acceleration. Marksman 1, which improves accuracy of the weapons. Engine Guru 2, which improves both acceleration and speed. And Marksman 2 to again improve the accuracy of the weaponry. If you're lucky enough to have a pilot with more than 12 skill points, what might you do? That would perhaps then depend on what sort of build you've selected. So, for instance, you might decide that you want to try and avoid your pilot being injured and complement, for instance, the cockpit armour that I've mounted with battle tested. If you're looking for a bit more manoeuvrability, you could consider Aerobatics Expert. Probably the most popular choice I would suggest is cruise flight to improve the speed of the aircraft between engagements. However, if you've mounted the navigation or radio equipment, you might look at supplementing that with the eagle-eyed skill, or if you've got an uprated engine, then you might look at one of the fire skills that the pilot can have, such as fire resistance or firefighting. But these are the 5 core skills that I would recommend in all cases. So let's look at post-build effects. Here we have a spreadsheet showing the effects of all my choices on the base characteristics of the aircraft, which you've seen before in the aircraft statistics section and are here again in columns C and D. The effects of my choices are in columns E and F. The difference between the two is expressed in absolute terms in column G and in percentage terms in column H. Here's what we've done with the weaponry. First effect is that we've increased the range of these 20mm cannons to 3,099 feet, nearly 3,100 feet, 15.2% increase. This helps me with adjusting my aim whilst I'm shooting at aircraft because I'm particularly poor at aiming with these 20mm, as I explained earlier in the video. We've also managed to widen the auto aim angle out to 2.75, which is getting towards an average figure. The already excellent dispersion angle has been tightened even further to 0.34. However, we've lost half a second of burst. I find that the extra range compensates for that, but it's still something I wish I hadn't lost, and you can avoid it if you so choose. If we look at items that aren't shown in terms of numbers, we've got a 10% extra chance of criticals coming from a bonus characteristic on the equipment I've fitted. There's no change to the ordnance figures, however, there is an important point about ordnance that will be coming up shortly. Turning our attention to survivability, we've got an improvement, which you would expect from the use of cockpit armour. The rating has gone up to 19. We've got a small increase in the hit points. It's not going to go very far, but it's welcome. 35 increase. Small increase in the damage resistance to 49. For me, most importantly, we haven't affected the fire resistance. If we look at the survivability characteristics in text down here, these ones aren't represented in numbers. We've got an improvement in the pilot's ability to resist injury by 42%, very welcome, with extremely potent rear gunners on Tier 10 bombers, of course. The next three effects come partly from the camouflage, but also some of the bonus characteristics. So 20% concealment improvement, 19% improvement in gunner's ability to resist injury, 10% tolerance to AA damage. We've got a reduction in the ability of the engine to resist damage. This is not good news because those engines do get knocked out a lot. So you need to put your aircraft in places where you're not going to be shot at by other planes, if you can possibly avoid that. And then we've got a 5% tolerance to rear gunner damage, and that one's coming from the camouflage. If we look at airspeed, we've got an improvement in the rating to 111. That's very nearly 15%, certainly above 14%. We've got an 81 mile an hour improvement in the cruise speed, 72 mile an hour improvement in the boost maximum speed. It's going to be a fast aircraft, and there's more to come, as you'll find out shortly. However, we have lost nearly 4 seconds of boost. That's 15% reduction there. We look at the airspeed figures that aren't represented in numbers. We have 19% acceleration improvement under boost, an improvement in the cooldown rate of the engine by 15%, very nearly 15% acceleration improvement when diving, and 5% acceleration when we're not boosting. Come to manoeuvrability. Although the point of this build is not particularly to increase manoeuvrability, a little bit of extra manoeuvrability is welcome because it allows me to stay on target a little bit longer. Thus, the rating has gone up to 29. We've got a turn time which is reduced to 16.34 seconds. Oh, we have lost a little bit of roll rate though. As far as your manoeuvrability is concerned, it's gone up by very nearly 11%. On altitude performance, the rating has gone up to 98, and that's because we've got a healthy improvement of 70 feet per second in the climb rate, which is going to help you escape pursuing heavies. Just as a reminder, the pilot has Aerodynamics Expert, Engine Guru 1 and 2, Marksman 1 and 2. Here's where we come to that point about ordnance I mentioned earlier. I like to mount the bombs because it gives me the flexibility to flip a sector where there are no aircraft left to shoot. However, if your concern is speed, take the bombs off, or if you're, for instance, being pursued by a Gloucester Javelin, dump them. What will happen is that your speed rating will go up to 115, your maximum cruise speed to 542, and your maximum boost speed 788 miles an hour. If I scroll upwards, you can see that those are considerably larger figures than the ones with the bombs mounted. So bear that in mind as either a general approach, you don't mount the bombs at all, or dumping them when you have to. Let's move on to the next build. I've added in the second build and kept the first in place for comparison purposes. The effects of the second build are shown in columns I and J. The difference between those effects and the base figures are shown in columns K and L. We've kept the cockpit armour, experimental polished skin, high-speed gas turbine and long gun barrels from the previous build. However, we've dropped the lightweight power unit and substituted an uprated engine, which is ultimate level and fully calibrated. There is no effect on the gun, so we'll skip over those and we'll talk about ordnance at the end as we did with the previous build. First port of call, therefore, is survivability, and we've still got an increase of 1 point to 19. We've still got the hit points that have increased by 35. We've got the damage resistance up by 2 points this time to 50. However, we have lost 33% or 20 points worth of fire resistance. And at this point, you might have to consider mounting fire extinguisher, perhaps using one of the 2 inerting consumables, or using pilot skills such as fire resistance or firefighting to combat this increased chance of fire, because unfortunately the XF-90 in my experience does tend to catch fire quite easily. We look at survivability. The change here is the loss of this adverse effect on the ability of the engine to resist criticals. Well, that's good news. As far as airspeed is concerned, the rating has now gone up to 117. We have a cruise speed of 568. You would expect a big improvement since we're using the uprated engine. It's actually 124 miles an hour above base. We even managed to get a little bit more on the boost speed, another 5 miles an hour, up to 77 improvement over base, 766 in total. We're still losing 3 3/4 seconds worth of boost, however. And we look at the airspeed here, we've got a 20% engine cooldown rate improvement, 19% acceleration with no boost, boost. Now we've got 19% acceleration with boost, and we've still got that nearly 15% acceleration in a dive. Where you would expect an adverse effect is on the manoeuvrability, because you've taken off the lightweight power unit, and so it is. We're now 2 points below base, and the turn time has gone up to 17.7 seconds, and we're still losing 8 degrees of roll rate as well. As far as the manoeuvrability on yaw is concerned, we're now losing very nearly 6% of that compared to base as well. So this is not for turn fighting. Finally, on the altitude performance, we have got yet another improvement, although it's a very small one, just another couple of feet per second, and that figure has gone up to 648. Pilot is the same as before, aerodynamics expert, engine gurus 1 and 2, and marksman's 1 and 2 as well. The effect of demounting the bombs. The speed rating goes up to 121, the cruise speed to 586, and the maximum boost speed up to 793. And that should allow you to escape a pursuing javelin at distance fairly easily. Finally, I've got some partial builds here to demonstrate the effects of other choices that you might like to make. So in these two columns, I am using a gun sight instead of cockpit armour, a lightweight wing frame instead of experimental polished skin. So you're favouring manoeuvrability. Yes, it is a thing on an XF-90 instead of speed, and gas-operated action on the guns instead of long gun barrels. In this section here, I'm looking at the effects of reinforced bulk carriers on guns. Going back to this section, we can see that the gun armament, we've improved the rating to 73. The DPS is up to 1270. That's getting up to the level of the base figures on the ME262 and the Javelin. Individual guns have got improvements on the DPS and rate of fire. However, key here is that the range is back to the base figure of 2,690 feet. Awkward for me, but for those of you who aim better than me, which apparently is everybody, you won't be bothered by this. The auto-aim angle, not as good an improvement as the first build, but still an improvement to 2.63. However, the dispersion angle is even tighter at 0.32, and previously we had 0.34. This is phenomenal. You pay for that by losing just over half a second's worth of burst length, whereas previously on the first build we'd lost just under half a second's worth of burst length. 10% cooldown rate on the guns, that's useful, but moving on, adverse effects on survivability, coming from the use of a lightweight wing frame. The rating has gone down to 17, loss of a point. We've lost some hit points, which is not welcome. It's already a fragile aircraft. The aircraft's wings and engine are more likely to get damaged, both unwelcome developments. So the damage resistance has come down to 46. However, the fire resistance is still 60. Now, if you're tempted to use manoeuvrability plus an uprated engine instead of the high-speed gas turbine, that will come down to, say, 40, as we've shown before, and then you'll have to use one of those measures, at least, I would imagine, that I talked about earlier in the video to combat the increased fire risk. On survivability, from a special skill of the pilot that we'll see later, we've got 25% damaged aircraft controllability. We've got some other effects which are familiar to you. However, it's worth noting that the pilot injury resistance is still up by 8%, despite the fact that we've dropped the cockpit armour. Now we've got 10% more chance of wing damage, which I mentioned just a moment ago, and 17% more chance of engine damage. With this build, you are going to have to make sure that you've got the upper hand when you fly up and engage another aircraft. You do not want to get shot. On the airspeed, the high-speed gas turbine brings the rating up to 109, so 476 cruise speed, boost maximum speed 761, still losing very nearly 4 seconds worth of boost duration. If you drop the bombs, the rating goes up to 109, the cruise speed 493 miles an hour, and the maximum boost speed 788 miles an hour, familiar figures from the previous build. And we have an improvement on the manoeuvrability, and it's pretty significant. The rating has gone up to 37. Now, this is not going to allow you to joust with fighters. However, if you come up against ME262s and Javelins that are stock or have been built for speed, you are going to be able to outmaneuver them. This doesn't appeal to me, but it might appeal to you as a surprise build. We look at the pilot skills, as I mentioned, they are a little bit different here. We've got battle tested, which I've mentioned before. We've now got aerobatics expert as well as aerodynamics expert. Still got engine guru 1 and 2. However, we've only got marksman 1, and we've also got cruise flight for more speed between engagements. Just to mention the gold anti-oxidizing additive, if you need extra fire resistance, perhaps you're using the uprated engine, that gives you, I think it's a 30% bonus. It's certainly a significant bonus. For those of you who simply cannot live with 3.5 seconds worth of burst length, and it is quite tricky, it needs careful management, you might be tempted to lose some of the great effects of gas operated action and long gun barrels in favour of getting, for instance, over 5 seconds worth of burst by using the reinforced bulk carriers. I think it's time we went and see how this aircraft performs in battle. This is an abbreviated section on strategy and tactics because it's the plateau map, it's the Blazing Sky variant, and there are 5 garrisons, only one of which is more important than the others. Tactically, possession of the central garrison means it's easier for you to get to the other garrisons. On the teams, we have 3 players each. I'm in the XF-90, we have an unspecialised EF-131 and an unspecialised Yak-19. The enemy has 2 specialised ground attackers, one the fast MEP-1102B, the German ground attacker, one the slower IL-40P, but of course capable of doing a lot of damage when it arrives at a sector, and then they have a Tier 9 Antonov-M. This is the sort of battle in which you want to farm. Let's see whether I did or not. We head into battle, and I'm using the first build that I showed you with the cockpit armour, the high-speed gas turbine, lightweight power unit and polished skin, plus the long gun barrels. My intention was to contest the ground attackers in this battle as much as possible. That didn't happen, nor did I get to use the ordnance, which may lead some of you to conclude that you shouldn't be mounting it at all, which is a valid thought. So here we go, we're into the central sector, shooting at one of the air defence heavies. Getting some space from it rather than turning immediately, otherwise we probably won't be able to turn on it and we won't be able to shoot at it because we'll just be straight past it. Decide to concentrate on the Cutlass rather than the air defence aircraft. Don't quite get on target there. And as you can see, I'm not turning. I'm selecting whatever targets present themselves in front of me. Do some serious damage to the J7 there. And now I'm going to get ideally 6,000 feet away if I want to turn around, or alternatively I can go straight on and contest this XF-90, or indeed the Antonov-M, which has just appeared, and that's what I decided to do. I put a few shots into the Antonov-M, he saw me coming so he avoids, again not turning of course, looking for the targets ahead of me, checking what's behind me, what the Antonov-M is doing for instance, and now I'm able to pursue the XF-90, which of course is a bot. Lining him up carefully, trying to get the lead right. Eventually start hitting him. This is where the extra burst length might come in handy for some of you, but I'm happy with the 3.5 seconds. Try and adjust my aim and get better at doing that. Come across the Cutlass again, this time we destroy it. Chainsaw through that aircraft. Can't turn for the J7W2, and again we fly on. We've lost the middle sector, and at the moment the ground attackers and the enemy team are severely outclassing us. 4 sectors to 1 up already, it's not looking good. Again, shoot at a Cutlass, they may have more than one of those. Destroy that one too. Now we're chasing down this heavily damaged ME-262. Capture a sector by destroying it. Just need to try and keep ourselves in the game, but I also need to be aware that if I'm not going to go for the ground attackers, I need to get after those bombers. Tu-12. And the burst length at 3.5 seconds or thereabouts isn't enough to knock down even a Tier 9 bomber, generally, in one pass. I get some space, turn again, come to finish it off. Still have to pause the guns briefly in order to do that. And again, we're 4 sectors to 1 down. I've accidentally dropped a bomb here. That wasn't on purpose. It just happened to be me fingering the button. Missed the J7. Or rather, didn't destroy it. Didn't actually completely miss it. And now we're into the central sector again, trying to take down the air defence heavy. Keeping an eye on the red arrows around me to see what may be threats. They all go small, so I'm at liberty to go after this XF-90 again. Long lead. Begin to work it over as I begin to get the lead about right. It's being a little bit difficult with its manoeuvring, so I have to adjust. Back out its engine. Now it's just a question of being able to finish it off without being shot down by anything whilst I'm not pursuing it. I'm looking for the other heavy. Again, we're 4-1 down. Their ground attackers are doing more work, and perhaps I should have been looking for the ground attackers and taking the risk of going after them. But otherwise, I'm demonstrating air superiority heavy, playing what's in front of me, flying away from what's behind me, by and large, not turning too soon. Keep in mind that 6,000 feet figure. It's a useful one if you're new to the aircraft. Get that separation and don't think about turning before that kind of distance. The exception will be is if you know you took out the engine of a target as you went past it, then you will get distance more quickly and it will be flying slowly and you can turn a little bit sooner, but that also takes experience. Set the Spitfire on fire. Have a look at it. I've damaged the engine. This is an instance where I can turn a little bit more quickly, and we do need this sector, and we need sectors quickly, so I'm prepared to take the chance of turning more quickly than I would normally. Now we finish it off and we've got this sector again, but as fast as I'm capturing sectors, the enemy is capturing sectors too. It's not looking good at the moment. So 4-1 down again. Third time of seeing the XF-90. This time the shooting's a bit better, or rather it's on target immediately. Down it goes very quickly. Spot one of the bot bombers. It's my job to take those out. They will flip sectors, even if it's slowly. We can't just leave them flying around doing their own thing. Both of them are here. Nearly finished the Junkers 287. Switch targets to the Tu-12. Pausing the guns. It takes pretty much 3 passes with the guns there. 3 bursts if you prefer. Nobody finished off the Junkers 287, so I need to do that now. Goes. And we head off to try and capture another sector. Looking to see why we're not performing particularly well. Get a Cutlass in my sights. This time we destroy it in 1 pass. And if you get the aiming right, these guns will chainsaw through low hit point aircraft quickly. Changed my target. I was going to go for the XF-90, but then realised that the J7W2, I believe it was on low health, so I killed that. Checked the mini-map and saw I could still turn for the XF-90, so we're going to take that out for the 4th time. Do that in 1 pass as well, because I got the aiming right. Quick check behind me, we're clear. See a bomber. It's my job to take those out. After the Tu-12 as well. Getting close to the scoreline here, and for the first time in the game we're actually ahead, although we're a long way behind in terms of sectors, we're a long way behind in terms of points. Decide that I'm going to kill the bomber even though it's not reached the scoreline yet. I don't think I've got time to wait. I need to get on and do other things. Get into another sector and kill the Spitfire. We saw the Hero of the Sky go through, Winged Legend go through. Seriously damaged the Yak. Again, resist the temptation to fly with it. I should have dropped this extra bomb, by the way. Having dropped 1 by accident, I shouldn't have flown on with 1. There goes the ace as I kill a Cutlass again. And now my team are 4-1 up. And there is just a chance that we might win this after all our efforts, being so far behind in the battle. I've steadily been knocking aircraft down. Hero of the Sky has gone through, probably roughly at the same time as the Winged Legend. I see a bomber. Tu-12, let's get that out of the game now. It is past the scoreline, so once this is killed, it won't be coming back, and that's important. We need to reduce their ability to flip sectors. And we have superiority. Good aiming on the J7W2. We take that out. Again, playing what's in front of us, we go for the Seahawk. Significant damage, and I saw the engine was damaged on the way through, so considering turning for this. I know it can't pursue me. Well, quite a bit sooner than the 6,000 feet I generally use as a guideline. Around about 4,500 feet I turn back for it. There it is, wallowing about in the sky helplessly. I finish it off. Get some shots into the Me-262 as I go by. Was going to turn for it, but then I spot that we've got the Antonov below. Got some shots into that. And the game is over. It's a fine win with a Marseille medal, an ace and a Hero of the Sky badge. Let's review the outcome of the battle. This was a first win of the day at ×2, and we can see from the centre it's a 5 chevron battle or a grade 1 heavy fighter if you prefer, and this grows to 187,288 credits, of which very nearly 62,500 came from a premium account bonus. In the message box we can see that there are no expenses, the aircraft wasn't shot down, so no repair costs. I bought my consumables in advance, half price in a sale. 11,364 experience, 4,457 base, 2,228 from the premium count bonus, and other bonuses providing more than 4,500 there. 568 free experience, the base there is 456, premium count bonus 111. We have 4 tokens, all for first medals of the day: the Maguire, the Marseille, Hero of the Sky badge, and the Ace. On the personal score tab, we can see that 2 of the class-specific missions were completed. That for destroying attack aircraft and bombers was 3/5 complete. That gives you 13 points, and that's exactly what you need for a 5 chevron battle. Personal points of 23,465 with 5 sectors captured, 23 aerial targets destroyed, 3 more than the Ace, 16,337 damage to aerial targets with 41 critical hits, didn't lose the aircraft, and capture points of 640. That was split 200 for defending, 440 for attacking. Team score tab, we can see that by personal points I would have been first on both teams, by chevrons first on my team and equal first on the enemy team. Pretty decent effort from the EF-131. He wasn't specialised, picked it up towards the end, and I wouldn't have won that game without him, that's for sure. Yak-19, big map, tier 10 battle. This is a pretty decent score for what I think was an unspecialised aircraft. On the enemy side, unsurprisingly, one of the ground attackers scored highly, especially as I didn't interfere with either of them during the game. Very good score from a tier 9 Antonov. This player clearly knows what he's doing in that plane, so well played to him. And the IL-40P, this isn't a great score, but to be fair, I think the IL-40P on the EU server is not a great aircraft. It's too slow in my opinion these days. We've come to the end of my review of the XF-90, and the story of this aircraft for me has been trying to cope with what I find to be tricky guns and surviving in EU server bomber spammed battles. Hence I have something of a hybrid build with cockpit armour and long gun barrels. The full speed build will appeal to many, particularly those on the NA server. Don't forget to remove the ordnance if you're interested in the maximum amount of speed possible. There's even a surprise manoeuvrability build that you might like to try. Well, I hope you found that interesting, and that if you did, you'll come and see my future content. Stick around, there's a bonus battle featuring that surprise manoeuvrability build with a gun sight, but this is where I leave you, so thank you for watching.